Yes, hi. Welcome to Gun Owner Against Violence. I'm your host, Mike Lapierre. Today is June 22nd, 2016, and I have to apologize. On my last video, I said 2017, and as much as I would like to claim the ability to be able to time travel and that I was ahead, that I'd gone ahead a year in time to make that video, much as I would like to lay claim to that, I don't have that ability. I just misspoke, and I apologize. But thanks for noticing. Thanks for catching that. So, today, what are we talking about? We're talking about the myth and fallacy and the mental masturbation, if you will, of the term common sense gun safety legislation. There's a whole lot wrong with that. It's not common sense. It's not gun safety. And all it is legislation that is going to make people feel better as though they've done something when it'll do little, if anything, to mitigate crime, violence, mass shootings, any of the things that we're all against. So let's start with the term common sense. Common sense, if this were truly common sense, we'd be focusing on prohibited people, prohibited behaviors, not on law-abiding people. The goal is to keep firearms out of the wrong hands, but in so doing, you're also making it harder for people, the lawful people, to purchase them, acquire them, and own them. You're making it more problematic. You're stigmatizing people, and no one is buying the idea that you're just wanting a few reasonable restrictions. The end goal is prohibition. And if you watch social media or you watch the news, you watch these talking head shows, the veneer is very thin as to what the end goal is. No one is buying that. So how do we keep firearms out of the wrong hands and doing it in a way that targets prohibited people and prohibited behaviors, but at the same time leaving the lawful firearms owners alone? Well, there's a few things we can do. Number one, anyone who's a prohibited person, this would be anyone with a violent felony or who's been adjudicated mentally ill, and there are a few other categories, but anyone like that who is a prohibited person, the government is aware of it, the prohibited person is aware of it. I'm saying that we should put something on their state-issued ID, driver's license, for instance, something on there, something like the letters FR, firearms restriction. So that way, if they're ever pulled over in a traffic stop, or they're ever in any kind of trouble and they're being talked to by law enforcement can see that they're a prohibited person and they're not supposed to have firearms. And if they have firearms, they're in major trouble. Sentencing guidelines for that are up to 10 years for a prohibited person to be in possession of a firearm. Also up to 10 years if you commit a crime with a firearm or if you have a firearm in your possession when you commit a crime. Those are pretty significant guidelines, and with good reason. Those are unacceptable behaviors. Committing a crime with or without a firearm, victimizing innocent people with or without a firearm, there's nothing acceptable about that. There's nothing okay about having that going on in our society. So yes, we do need to have tough sentencing guidelines for those behaviors. We have the guidelines, but we're not prosecuting. The judges are notorious for giving light sentences for these crimes, with criminals who are repeat offenders, who use firearms in the commission of a crime or have one on their person in the commission of a crime. Why are we letting them off light? That's an insane priority. I just don't understand that, why that's not a higher priority, because that would send a message to criminals that that's a major consequence to this undesirable behavior. I don't think there's a person alive that can disagree with this. So if we can all agree that we ought to be imposing these sentencing guidelines or using them to the max, in fact, I've got no problem going 20 years to life for someone who uses a firearm in a commission of a crime or has one in their possession. There's nothing, like I said, there's nothing acceptable about that behavior. But assuming we're all on board with that, I would love to see several things happen. We can use the media to get the message out that, hey, if you're using a firearm in the commission of a crime, have one on your person during the commission of a crime, or a prohibited person in possession of a firearm, you're looking at some extremely stiff penalties, and we are enforcing the guidelines to the max. That would send a powerful message to violent criminals. This would be robbers, rapists, carjackers, gay bashers, home invaders, anyone who would try to harm people with or without a firearm, but especially with a firearm. That these are activities that could land you a long stretch at Club Fed. This is a federal crime, and federal prison is where you're going to go if you violate that. Also, since most of these people are known, the prohibited people, you could do a mailing campaign to inform them of the same message I just described. Now, what I've just discussed is something that would put a major burden on violent criminals and anyone with bad intentions and who is a prohibited person, but it leaves the lawful firearms owners alone. Isn't that what we all want? That's what the mental masturbation talks about. We just want a few reasonable restrictions, gun safety. This would go toward that. So let's switch gears. The no-fly list, no-buy list. On the surface, it sounds like a great idea, but it's completely unconstitutional. There's no due process there. It violates the Fifth Amendment and possibly some others. I'm not an expert on it, but I do have some familiarity with the Bill of Rights. These are people who have not been convicted of any crimes. They're just on a watch list, and some of them rightfully so, some of them wrongfully so. So there's no due process, and also it's very difficult to get off this list and get that straightened out if you're on there incorrectly. Also, these lists can be abused. I can totally see these lists being used where let's say, for instance, all the NRA members, all the concealed carry holders, all of the people with hunting and fishing licenses, or somehow all of a sudden on the no-fly, no-buy list. I could totally see that being abused and being used irresponsibly. So it opens a dangerous can of worms. I appreciate the appeal of it, but there's no due process there, and I can see that being abused, and I just think it's a mess. What I would rather see is there's a campaign out there called Fix NICS. Fix the NICS system. There's a website, FIXNICS. The existing background check system is a positive thing, but there are some massive flaws with it. There are people in there who should not be in there. These are lawful people who, through maybe clerical error or kind of a junior or senior thing or someone else with the same name, have managed to appear in the database as though they've got some sort of criminal offense, and they don't. And it costs thousands of dollars to straighten that out. So that needs to be fixed. The other side of that is there are a lot of prohibited people who with felonies or people who have been adjudicated mentally ill who are not in the database, and they should be. That's an even bigger problem. So I think we should all agree, I can't imagine why we wouldn't all agree, on fixing the NICS. So we've got a solid database there. And I'm fine with the existing background checks. The existing background checks, the way that works is if you're buying a firearm in a store or at a gun show, you have to do a background check. They run a background check on you. You also have to fill out form number 4473, and that asks you a lot of questions about have you ever been convicted of a crime, have you ever been adjudicated mentally ill, are you addicted to drugs? I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but there's about 7 or 8 questions there, and if you falsify your answers to those questions, that is a felony. You're looking at some jail time for falsifying your 4473. So there's some real teeth there. So it's impossible to buy a new firearm without a background check and without doing your 4473. So personally, I'm fine with the existing background checks. The only problem with it is there's been millions of denials since that's been instituted in the late 90s. I think it was 1998. And there's been less than 24 prosecutions of those denials. So if you ask me, that is a pretty significant occurrence if someone who's a prohibited person attempts to purchase a firearm and they are denied. Why are we not investigating that? To find out, well, is it an error in the system? Is this a lawful person and there's just a problem in the database? Or is this a violent criminal with a criminal record or someone mentally ill who's attempting to buy a firearm? Why are we not investigating that? And more importantly, when that is the case, why are we not prosecuting that? What the hell is the matter with that priority? That is a powerful, powerful tool we have at our disposal, and it only is a problem for people with bad intentions or who are prohibited people. Why are we not doing more with that? That's just an insane priority. The next part of background checks is getting into the expanded background checks, trying to do that with private purchases. Good intentions around all that, but it's impossible. There's no way to enforce it. And I've posed this question many times on previous videos, but I'll pose it again. What is the plan for making lawless criminals comply with the background checks? What is the plan for making lawless criminals comply with the background checks? They laugh at this. Because if you get two prohibited people in a room, one has a firearm, the other has some cash, they're just going to agree on a price and the transaction will happen. They're too lazy to go to wherever that place is for the background check. And also, criminals might be idiots, but they're not stupid. If they know they're not going to pass a background check, they're not going to go submit to a background check. It's just common sense. That's common sense. And unfortunately, it doesn't work in our favor. So there's no way to enforce that. Prohibited people are always going to want firearms, and they're always going to be able to get firearms. A couple of things to consider on that note. You or I may not be able to make a firearm, but even the most basic primitive metal fabricator can do that. And if you ever succeed in banning guns, you're going to get these primitive fabricators in basements and garages making primitive firearms and fueling a black market demand for them where only the criminals have them. The law-abiding people have been disarmed, and now the criminals have been emboldened, and they're going to be merciless at victimizing innocent people. I don't think that's anything we all want. And on the same note, as far as how easy it is to make a firearm, crude firearms have been manufactured inside prisons. So if you have this idea that we can ban firearms and rid society of guns, I'm going to ask you to think again, because it's not possible. And if it ever were possible, the only hands you'd take them out of are the law-abiding, and we'd be emboldening criminals, and violent crime rates would skyrocket. Okay, back to the original thing that I was talking about, common sense gun safety legislation. Let's look at that term, gun safety. Gun safety is a term that's been used for generations by the gun community. The last few years, the gun control community has tried to hijack that phrase and use it as their own. It's downright laughable. Most of these folks cannot cite the 4 tenets of gun safety. I'm not going to recite them here. Either you know them or you don't. If you don't know the 4 tenets of gun safety, I don't think you have any business using that term. Also, these so-called proponents of gun safety, what gun safety training do they have? What gun safety classes? Where are these instructors? Where are these safety classes? Where are these trainings occurring? There's no gun safety training. There's no gun safety classes or instructors. This is just legislation. It's piecemeal prohibition. It's obsessing on guns. The idea is just to make it more and more difficult to own guns and to buy guns, and basically make it so onerous politically and legally that people just give up on being lawful gun owners. That's the end game with that. And I don't think anybody is buying it, that they're just wanting a few reasonable restrictions. Now let's flip that coin over, the gun safety coin. Who is the leader in gun safety, and who is responsible for gun accidents being at 30 and 40-year lows? Who would that possibly be? Maybe it's the NRA. Maybe it's that dreaded big bad wolf, the NRA, who's a leader in gun safety, who's an advocate for gun safety, who has training for gun safety and instructors and classes all around the country. Do a Google search for NRA training. See what comes up. Then do a Google search for every town gun safety training and see what comes up. So I don't understand why the NRA is the big bad wolf in all of this. The NRA is the leader in gun safety, gun responsibility, and lawful, and just the lawful use of firearms. Now, a lot of people are not comfortable with firearms. That's fine, but that's just a collective phobia. A lot of that is unfounded. And people are saying, wait a minute, aren't you afraid of mass shootings and violent crime? Of course, everyone is. That's why gun rights are so important, so we can protect themselves. Law-abiding people can protect ourselves from violent criminals who would do us harm, who are predators and take advantage of innocent people. That's what the NRA is an advocate for. is the rights of law-abiding people to defend themselves from violent criminals who victimize innocent people. There's not one word in any of the NRA's message that condones or advocates anything to do with crime or violence or mass shootings or any of that. That's just a whole bunch of rhetoric from the gun control side. It's a bunch of bullshit. If you can find something, a message from the NRA, where they're condoning or advocating violent crime or breaking the law, using a firearm to rob people, rape people, do carjackings or home invasions, if you can find a message from the NRA where they're condoning that or advocating that, I'd love to hear it. I think it's going to take you a while to find it because I'm not aware of it. And I'm an NRA member. I have been for a long time, and I watch them pretty closely and listen to them pretty closely, and they make a lot of sense to me. They are the voice of reason in the gun debate. They're the ones that talk about the rights for lawful people to be able to protect themselves from violent criminals, people who victimize innocent people. I don't think any of us is okay with victimizing innocent people. Gun control makes that easier. I don't understand that priority. I understand the irrational fear around firearms. I understand there's lots of people who've never been exposed to firearms, been around firearms. I totally get that. I understand that. I understand why people pose the question, why does anyone need a firearm? Why would anyone want to carry a loaded firearm in public? I understand that. I understand the misunderstanding about it. And that's fine. And for people who are genuinely curious about it, I'm happy to try to explain where I'm coming from with it. And I'm all for trying to help people understand that. But as far as those folks trying to judge us and shame us and ridicule us and mock us and stigmatize us, now it's a diversity issue. Now that's bigotry. You're shaming and blaming and persecuting lawful people. How is that any different from shaming, blaming, persecuting, and all the rest to people of different races, different religions, different sexual orientations? How is that different? Explain to me, please, how that is any different. It's absolutely no different. These are lawful people we're talking about. And people try to marginalize lawful gun owners like it's this little fringe group. And I think we're seeing in the news with the recent activities in the Senate that maybe that's not the case. There's approximately 100 million law-abiding gun owners in America. That is a lot of people. And there's a number out there that says it's roughly 1 out of every 2 homes has a firearm in it. So it's hardly a fringe group. Just because there's not a firearm in your home doesn't mean there aren't firearms in other people's homes. And that is a deterrent, an active and passive deterrent to violent crime. Because lawful gun ownership is a deterrent to anyone who would consider breaking into a home, doing a burglary or a home invasion. It sends a message that that's an activity that could cost you your life. And like I said, criminals may be idiots, but they're not stupid. They value their life as much as we value ours. And they do stop and think about that. Likewise with lawful carry of a firearm. The woman walking across a parking lot to her car late at night, the potential rapist is forced to pause and say, well, does she have a concealed firearm on her body or in her purse? If I try to initiate a rape, how is that going to play out? Rapists and robbers and anyone else who victimize innocent people do it because they think they can get away with it. Lawful carry of a firearm changes that equation. And it changes in a very significant and meaningful way. So now it's forcing violent criminals to think twice. Because like I said, criminals may be idiots, but they're not stupid. They value their life. And if they don't think they can get away with it, they're going to move on. And I would love it if there were a way to measure the number of crimes that have been deterred just by a criminal changing their mind, thinking, well, I'm not going to do it. That person could be armed. I would love to see. It's not possible to have a statistic on that, but I would love if there were a way to measure that where we could really see a number on that or see some kind of statistic on that. I think that would be pretty impressive. So anyway, thanks for listening to my rant here. I appreciate your listening to this rant and all my other rants. I hope this is informative and helpful. Let me know what you're thinking. Do you agree with this? Disagree with this? Is this resonating or not resonating? It's an issue I care about very deeply. I don't pretend to be an expert on it, but I've been a student of gun rights and the Second Amendment for the last 20 years or so, and I've owned firearms and been in a firearm family all my life. My father was in law enforcement, and we had firearms in the house. My father had the infinite wisdom to show my brother and I how to use firearms safely, responsibly, and lawfully when we were very young. It's better to deal with a child's curiosity than to forbid it and have them stumble upon it and have a horrible accident happen. And I've got to clarify that. He didn't hand us a deer hunting rifle at 6 years old. That's not quite the way that goes, and tell you to go play out in the yard with the deer hunting rifle. It started with a BB gun and moved up to smaller caliber handguns and small youth-sized rifles. And as you become proficient, you get a little more freedom with it. Also, as a young person grows, now you can start handling larger, like a 12-gauge shotgun or a deer rifle. And you have the physical size to be able to accommodate that. So that's kind of my background with it, and that's by no means unique. There's plenty of people in this country who've had that same growing up experience. Their parents may or may not have been in law enforcement there, but it's very common, especially in rural areas, for there to be firearms in the home, and for young people to be brought up that way in those traditions, and those are honorable traditions. And I'm very proud to have been a participant in that tradition. And it's something I'm proud of, and I think it's important, and that's why I talk about this. It's because when you try to blame, punish, stigmatize, mock, and shame that tradition, it is a diversity issue, and I find it upsetting and offensive to hear that. So that's what motivates me to try to set that straight and make this point of view known to the degree that I'm able. So thanks for listening. Have a great day. If you have thoughts, feelings, opinions about it, one way or another, good, bad, or otherwise, I'd love to hear it. Have yourself a great day.